Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We're hoping you let us know where you think we got it right and where we completely missed the point, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. So let's get into it. What shall we discuss today, Brian?
Well, I think we have to talk about all the different reasons people will stay quiet, even though they vehemently disagree with what's going on. So last week, I said a couple things that are completely at odds with each other. One is, looking back, like one of the things that prompted me to start doing this with you is, how in the world could you be a person who lived 3 miles from Auschwitz and not say anything?
Right.
And so last week I said, I'm beginning to understand how that could happen. I'm beginning to develop a sense of grace for those folks. And also simultaneously, I'm pissed that people don't have more balls to speak up and say something, and which is completely contradictory, right? So
Right.
I think it's important to explain to Kenny G, our guy who is a middle-aged person in the year 2080, 2090, somewhere in there, who's likely coming into a period of like this for himself, how this could be, because those things don't make any sense. Although now living in this moment, they make complete sense.
Yeah, right. Some things you probably can't understand until we're actually in the moment, walking in the shoes of societal upheaval, which is where we're at today.
Yeah. Yeah. So, again, Dave and I are not sociologists. We don't spend our free time charting demography and societal trends and things like that. We're just a couple of dopey guys who make note of what we see. Okay, so a dopey guy and a really brilliant guy who note what's going on around them. Who are the people who are saying? And to be clear, I'm talking about the people who are not in agreement with what's happening. We may do a show one time about all the reasons people would be for what's happening. That's not who we're talking about today.
Right.
Today we're talking about people who feel like what is happening is wrong, reverting back to racial segregation, for example. Just the country just not being, not producing great results, not having institutions that are functional. Like, there's people who just feel like what's going on is not right, and they're not talking. So why are they not talking, Dave?
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of different reasons. I think that for some folks, they're just in denial. It's like, well, it's going to pass. It's a phase. It's kind of like when I had acne as a teenager. It's going to go away. It's just something that's happening, and therefore I'm not going to spend some time on it. I think you've got lots of folks, and we can delve into each of these a little bit more. I think there's plenty of people that know something's going on, and they can see it all around. They see it's crazy, and they like to say something about it, but they're scared to. They're scared of being socially ostracized. They're scared of being canceled. We did an episode on cancel culture a while back. They're scared of being canceled. They're scared of, we're business owners. Maybe they're scared of losing business because, people tend to do business with people that they like. I think there's some people that I encounter this pretty regularly on social media. There's people that might press the like button to something that I say that might be kind of forceful, but they don't want to say it themselves because they don't feel that they're articulate enough. Maybe they don't feel like you and I speak for a living, right? I mean, that's a lot of what we do is we talk. But there's a lot of folks that, they can see something's wrong, but they just don't know how to really put it into words, or maybe they don't think they're compelling when they put it into words. There's other folks that are just non-confrontational. They don't like the confrontation. They see it's wrong. They'd love to say something about it, but they just don't feel comfortable getting into a debate or an argument. They just don't have the personality for that. That happens. I think there's people that know they can see on the surface that it's wrong. It violates basic common sense, but they don't feel well informed enough. They can't, summon the facts and the arguments and the statistics and the data, to really go after it. And then I think there's another group of folks that, we live in a time, and presumably, 80-ish years from now, Kenny G is going to live in a time when there's societal upheaval, not just in one thing or two things or five things or 10 things, but in many, many things. And so, you're looking over here and you're seeing this, weird stuff on college campuses. You're seeing wars in multiple places in the world that you want to say something about. You see that families are being torn apart. You just see all of these things, and you're just tired. You're just
Yeah.
tired. There's just so much going on. You're tired. So those are a few things that come to
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. So let's just I have a similar list. So let's just start at the top of I'll just kind of go through some of these things here, and
Yeah.
you can check them off your list as we go through yours. The
Yeah.
first one, the first category I have, and I think I have, I don't know, 7 or 8 or something like that here. And again, I'm not talking strictly just people who agree. And if you're wondering why we're talking to Kenny G 80, 90 years ago from now in the future, and Dave just mentioned when Kenny G is going through his own cycle like this, if you're wondering what the heck we're talking about, I'd invite you to listen to episode 13, where we talk about why we believe this is a cyclical thing that our society and we face in our era. We're facing it now just as we have in previous times, in around 80 to 90 year intervals, and we're in the thick of ours now. So anyhow, first category I have is folks who just kind of believe some, and I don't mean this is harsh, it's going to sound probably, but some version of it's not my problem. Like,
Right.
yes, they're all messed up in DC or the state legislature or the people in charge. Of course, they're all screwed up, but they've always been that way. They've always kind of pulled out the last minute. Yes, there's wars that happen, but people are either involved who have the ability to figure this out, or it just by luck just always kind of works out. We've not really experienced in our lifetimes the catastrophic failures of the Civil War period, the Great
Right.
Depression, World War II, World War One, the Revolutionary War, like these major periods of conflict that are just
Right.
on a scale our generations who are alive now have not experienced, with very few exceptions of people who are 108 years old or whatever.
Right.
It's just always kind of worked out in our lifetime. There's
Yeah.
it, and so some of it is just, it's not my problem, or it might be another version would be, yeah, it's a mess, but my life is a lot better not dealing with it than giving up everything to focus on politics. And it really
Right.
would take that, as you kind of alluded to. And then yet another version would be, yeah, it's all screwed up, but it's not really affecting me. Yeah, I pay more
Right.
taxes than I like. Yeah, if I had kids who were, fourth grade, I wouldn't want them to be going to school and having the teacher foist upon them, conversations about fisting and things that are just completely inappropriate. But I don't have kids in school, so it's not really my fight. I hope parents are taking it to them, but it's not my fight. I don't have kids.
Right.
So for me, it's like this kind of version of like, it's just not my problem. Other folks are put in place to deal with this stuff, or I don't have significant consequences to deal with as a result of the bad things. Therefore, I got other things to focus on. Does that kind of make sense, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that really stands out in that is what folks call normalcy bias. This idea that things are static. There's a little dip in the road right now, but it's there's people in place in DC and other places that are going to fix it. My life's pretty good, so it's normalcy bias. And what comes to mind, because we tend to believe that as things are going now for us, the things we like, those things are going to continue. And it's I think as a sociological thing, even though I'm not a sociologist, I do read about it on the weekends.
Yeah.
I think as a sociological thing, it's how we human beings deal with the fact that we're all headed towards dying. the ultimate
Right.
abnormal thing. All we've ever known is living, but yet we're heading towards dying, and therefore we pretend like we're going to live forever. And so normalcy bias is a thing that is a coping mechanism for the world. But the problem is, in times like these, it really sets us up for not seeing what's going on around us and not taking action. I'll give you an example. The thing that always comes to mind when we talk about this kind of thing is the sound of music. You remember the sound of music, Julie
Yeah.
Andrews and
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Hills Are Alive. So that is set in World War II times, and
Yep.
it's set in, and they've got these grand, grand houses, and they've got these grand hills, and it's this gorgeous, beautiful thing at a time when the backdrop of all of it was the most horrific evil in the last century. And so
Right.
they went along, with their routine in their household, and they did their things, and the father would, well, so it was all very normal until the entire world collapsed and imploded. So normalcy
Right.
bias is a useful thing for us, but it's also a very dangerous thing because it sets us up to be taken by surprise when these tough things come. So I think that's one of the big things, as you were mentioning, that we're experiencing right now. Folks are saying,
Yeah.
it'll pass. It's just a blip, all of that.
And it's funny you say that. One of the critiques that we've gotten from doing this podcast so far is, man, you guys are pretty doom and gloom, like, and I consider myself to be an optimistic person.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I don't want to be obtuse and naive
Yeah,
and
exactly.
just kind of, shucks, things are going to be okay. Things are clearly not going to be okay as far as I'm
Right.
concerned. And anyhow, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that is one of the dangerous things. Another group, I guess, would fall into this category of, as you mentioned earlier, it's just freaking exhausting.
Yeah.
I mean, it could consume every waking moment to educate yourself, to prepare yourself to do battle. And it
Yeah,
does feel like sometimes doing battle, like
it does.
verbal jousting, and like it's exhausting to consume the information, to filter the information, to try to think through your points and prepare yourself to go engage somebody who disagrees. You could consume your entire life. This is still fall short. It's absolutely exhausting. And again, looking back at the people who I'm so fond of criticizing, who lived in 1943 next to Auschwitz, like, yeah, but so what? Like, people are being gassed to death. Like put on your big boy pants and get after it anyway. But now living in this moment, it's like, yes, but I also have a wife, and I have children, and I have hobbies, and I have a right to be happy in life too. And
Right.
and
Right.
and we'll get into some other points here as well, but it's just freaking exhausting.
Well, it is. It is. I mean, I find myself, I enjoy the debate.
Yeah.
It's just how I'm built. It's not because I'm more courageous than anybody else. I just like it. So I
Yeah.
get out there and
Yeah.
I don't mind confronting people. But at the same time, it can get tiring, and it can get, exhausting. I think of the people that have like these talk shows where they're talking. We do this once a week, but these people
Yeah.
that get out there and they're talking about the negative issues, and they're debating every single day of the week. That strikes me as a potentially very exhausting thing, because you're
Yeah.
always confronting the negative. Now, you get paid to do it and all that, but you're always
Yeah.
confronting the negative, and you're always debating current issues. And yeah, it could be very tiring. Now, it seems to me, so when I think about that myself, so what do you do about that, right? So when I think about that myself, I think, well, um, how much can I contribute before my exhaustion takes over? In other
Right.
words, I think the response that a lot of folks have to it being exhausting is to not engage at all. And
Right.
it seems, and we know that from radical movements that end up taking over countries and committing all sorts of atrocities, et cetera, that is usually done by a very, very small percentage of people, and against the wishes of a very, very large but silent group of people. So in other words,
Yeah.
if you look at Mao's China or a number of other, situations in history, there have been a lot of situations where it very well may have been, and we don't have good records, but it very well may have been, probably was, that there was a ton of people against what was happening, but it was just too tiring or too
Yeah.
intimidating to engage, and so they don't. And so,
Right.
I think you do from the standpoint of those of us that do engage. I have to discipline myself to know when the cutoff point is, so
Yeah.
that it just doesn't get overwhelming or you don't start losing focus.
Yeah. And for me, it is like a wave on a shore. There is an ebb and flow to it. There's times where
Yeah,
I get so frustrated or angry or like, how can nobody see this that I have to speak? And then there's
right.
times where I'm just like, this is all I've talked about for a week or two or three. I just have to let it go. I have to like
Yes,
go do
exactly.
something fun for a couple days. Like, just who
Right,
cares if it burns down tomorrow, so be it. And
right.
that kind of leads to the next thing, which is a similar but different. We just talked about it's too exhausting. The next version I have is it's just too maddening. like
Yeah,
like you
sure.
can just get so worked up. It can ruin your day.
Yeah,
It can ruin evenings with your family, your spouse. I mean, it can it can just it can just ruin your day. And again, there's this balance between, yes, I'm pissed, and yes, somebody has to do something, and yes, I want to do my part. And life is so short that I have fleeting moments where I'm not working and I don't have other obligations, where
right,
I can enjoy myself and my family and my loved ones. How can I ruin those taint those times with this stuff? Like,
right.
I gotta be happy sometimes too, you know?
Well, and I think that gets back to knowing yourself, right? I mean, getting to the point where you say, I want to. Well, I think first of all, you also have to distinguish why you would engage in debate, why you would engage in the current events that are going on, and try to make a difference. There's two possibles, and for me, knowing myself well enough, there's two possible things. One, I like to win, and so
Yeah,
there's times when I'm in a debate, I'm like, no, I got a point I can score rhetorically. I'm just going to go, well, okay, okay, well, that's not really the most noble of, of things. But
right,
the
right, right,
second one is, if you know yourself well enough to know that you do have some things to offer, but also that I can't let it get to the point where it controls me, it emotionally, depresses me or pushes me down or makes me, ruins my day and ruins the day of everybody around me. I have to know where those boundaries are. I have to know myself well enough to know that, so that I can, therefore, if we're giving advice to our future a friend Kenny G, who's flying around in the Flying George Jetson car, what you can say is,
yeah,
Kenny, know where your limit is. Make sure you contribute, but know where your emotional limit is, and
right,
also make sure you know that what somebody else's emotional limit is not your emotional limit. In the debates that I engage in, sometimes folks will talk to me on Facebook or off of Facebook about these debates that I get into, and they say, "How can you go back and forth with this person, these people, for so long without losing your cool?" Well, it's because I kind of know in where the cutoff point is. Usually, at least, not always.
yeah,
I usually know where the cutoff point is, and so therefore, I feel an obligation to contribute, but I
yeah,
also feel a not an obligation, but a satisfaction in knowing that I'm not going to change things necessarily. I can contribute, and I've done my part. And yes, the whole thing could still go to hell in a handbasket, but I did my part,
right.
right?
Yeah, and when I talk about it's maddening, I don't just mean the engagement. I also mean it's hard to know who to even trust as far as like the news,
Yeah.
or there's certainly, what we call now influencers or personalities.
Oh yeah.
um Somebody you could be like, there, yeah, those people are, and then all of a sudden they say something and you're just like, what in the hell are you talking about, and you completely
Yeah.
lose them. Or a trusted news source will get something wrong, they just flat get it wrong.
Yep.
And and it's not concrete, it's not black and white. There's tons of shades of gray, and like the time it takes to devote to that is maddening. People having just dumb opinions and harmful approaches is maddening. Like,
Yeah,
just how can people be like this? How can people think that going back to segregation is right? Like, it's just maddening to have to even like try to figure out an argument for that. Like, it's just, so it's not even just the engagement part. It's like enduring it is maddening. Being stuck in
sure.
this moment is maddening.
It
Having to
is.
filter through this crap is maddening, right?
Wait, well, it is, and yeah, no, that's totally the case, and that gets sort of back to the previous point of being tired too. There's
Yeah.
so many maddening things. There's so many things coming at you from every direction. You feel like you're standing in the middle of a circular firing squad. Everybody's just, coming at you at once. So that's absolutely maddening. And again, I think that's where it's important to know which battles you want to fight. There's of the 120 things that at this point in history I think are crazy. There's no possible way that I could do a reasonable job in resisting all 120, right? So if my advice to Kenny G is pick your battles, is definitely just pick your battles.
And and for me, I guess the people, if they listen at all, they've heard me talk about this. Like, I've just gotten clear in my values, and I just stick to that. Like, and I think that because all roads lead to that, for me at least.
Yeah.
There's certain lines that, like, how it manifests itself is going to vary from topic to topic. But here's my So
well, and to
yeah.
that point, Brian, I think another important thing about that is to these folks that we're talking to that aren't engaging because they don't believe that they can have a meaningful conversation. If you stick to your values and argue the one value and not get taken off course by 1,000 different context, nuances, and details, then at that point you can contribute without feeling an obligation to be an expert in everything.
Right. No, that's 100% true. That's 100% right. Okay, so the next one I have is, again, you touched on this, is people who are just staying quiet because they don't, because it would be so time consuming to educate yourself properly. Yeah. Some people certainly, I'm sure, feel like they don't fully understand what's going on, and or they couldn't fully explain their perspective, or they couldn't explain to their 12-year-old kid what's going on.
Right.
And you cannot risk being on the wrong side because the consequences of are massive if you're quote unquote canceled or ostracized or whatever. And so, like, again, this is not a news events podcast, but currently in this moment right now, one of the major stories in the world is this new iteration of the conflicts that have been going on for eons in the Middle East, right? And nobody has the right story, right? Nobody has the one way it all unfolded. There's nuance we'll never understand. There's tribal conflict we could never wrap our heads around because we didn't grow up in that kind of environment. We just don't understand it and whatever. And now there's no shortage of opinions. I'm not saying there's a shortage of opinions, but for anybody just to say, like, well, I know what's going on over there, anybody who says that, I'd be reluctant to listen to.
Right.
There's certainly people who have educated themselves, and you would probably fall in this category, who have the historical knowledge to be able to, and the ability to articulate things. But most people just don't have that because the time it would take, it's not a topic they're interested in. They're maybe not that articulate. They kind of know what they would think, but they getting it in words that would make sense. And you risk getting taken off course, to your point a minute ago, with all the, well, what about this and what about that? And you're like, well, I didn't think of that one thing that happened in 1967, so I don't have an answer for that. And again, like, you can find yourself in a situation where you're not prepared, and the consequences are significant. They're massive for being quote unquote on the wrong side.
Well, and you see, and this one is a great illustration of the point that I was just making a few minutes ago, and that is picking the thing that you know and just arguing for the thing that you know and not getting taken off track. So just, again, we're not current events, but I'm just going to pick one thing from our current cycle that by Kenny G's time is ancient history. And that is this attack by Hamas against Israel. So you can go into the whole, conflict that stretches back 3,000 years or to all of that's going on. or you can and you'll just get lost in the details. Even if you do know the history, there's lots of details you can get lost in. But it's easy enough to say that here's some things that are happening right here, right now, that are bad. This is wrong. This thing that happened is wrong. There is no context to this thing that has happened that's wrong. In one case, it's people parachuting into a music festival and just killing a bunch of innocent civilians.
Right.
That's wrong. Whatever else happened beforehand, well, but these people did this. And no. Yes, there's context to it. But can you admit that this is wrong? Or, there's examples of things being done to children that, I'm not going to go into, but you can say that 100% of the time, this is wrong and this shouldn't happen. And so if you pick things that are within the scope of where your value system is, that are clear examples of right and wrong, and argue from that without trying to solve the entire thing and say, well, those are fun coffee conversations. Well, fun is the wrong word, but those are interesting coffee conversations to have and to go into all the history and the details and all that. But for those that can see something is wrong, you can engage in one thing and say, this is wrong and this shouldn't happen, and therefore I'm upset about that, and stick to that and don't get dragged off points on context and nuance and all that.
Right. And that's a fine line in those conversations of, you won't even consider the other person's perspective because there's always a reason for it. As you and I have said over and over and over in this podcast, it seems like the through line in human history and conflict is it's either because we were born superior and therefore we should be able to impose our will, or these people did a bad thing to us and therefore our retaliation is justified. That's the history of human conflict.
That is all human conflict. Well,
every single example, micro in marriages, all the way to continents and countries fighting, that seems to be the through line.
And every, I was having this discussion with somebody yesterday. Every atrocity in all of human history was caused by something that happened before it. So whether you talk about the Khmer Rouge or heaven forbid we bring up Hitler, was Hitler abused as a kid? The Germans were treated badly after World War I. And so, there's always a reason. But in whatever, Jeffrey Dahmer, why did he eat people? Well, there was a reason for it. There was things that caused it. But you still have to have moral clarity to say that whatever the reason behind this, the actions now are wrong actions. And see, this is freeing, I think, for folks that are sitting on the sidelines and say, well, I don't know the entire history of this or that or the other thing, but I know this is wrong, but I don't know the entire history of this or that or the other thing. You don't need to. You can see. You don't need
to, right?
You understand that human history is reasons that lead to atrocities. Every single one of them. All you need to know is this atrocity is evil, and we must do something to stop it. And that's where the conversation stops. And then people yell at you, like I get yelled at last night for, well, you didn't consider any of the points I said on an online debate I was on this current topic. Well, you didn't consider any of the points I said. Right. I didn't consider them because they're not relevant to what's going on right now. They're relevant in the broad context. But here's the only thing that matters right now. This happened and this is wrong. And I think this is what we can say to Kenny G in the future, because Kenny G's got 100 years more of history to deal with than we do. So he's got even a heavier lift. I mean, I'm a history buff and I love, what I've picked up over the years on history. But Kenny G's got a bigger lift than I do because he's got another century under his belt or ish. And so, Kenny, just concentrate on what's in your value set and what you see here and now and argue against that. That's how you get engaged.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So I got a few more here. The next group, and I know people in this category specifically, they know what is going on is wrong, but to quote unquote come out and voice opposition, they would risk losing their entire life, their friends, their career, their family, their status, their income. You talked about this a minute ago. Yep. All these things are horrendous, and I'm not going to give up my, significantly higher than average income or my circle of people who are high status friends, or my status in other areas, or all of my friends I've known since college or high school or elementary school, or I'm not going to give up relationships with my children who are grown and have their own opinions. Like They know this stuff is wrong, but the consequences to them personally are just too high.
Well, and Brian, that's the one I respect the most, honestly, because that one is a conscious risk reward calculation that somebody does, and who says that the risk to the things that I value is higher than the reward of making my opinion known. Now, so in all honesty, that's the one that I respect the most. Now, not that I disrespect other people for being, scared to speak out. I don't. I get it. I totally get all of the things we're talking about here. So I'm not putting anybody down. But I think the what people have to do when they've got that, when you're thinking about that mindset, and I think every one of us, that mindset could come to me. I mean, that mindset could get to any of us at any time. There's nobody with such, I think, moral clarity and courage that regardless of what's happening, they're going to speak out. I mean, I would not claim that for myself.
It would be such an infinitesimally small percentage of the population that would risk losing their, a 7 or 8 figure income and their relationships with their children and all the status they've acquired over, 65 years or whatever. That's a heavy lift.
It's a huge lift. And so now here's the counterbalance to that lift. There comes a point when there are certain things that probably are going to be lost. When a crisis deepens, a crisis will deepen and deepen and deepen. And at some point, maybe by not speaking out, you and your cohort are buying yourselves another month or two of comfort. At that point,
you mentioned The Sound of Music. The Sound of Music is a perfect illustration of this.
Exactly.
They went along, and they went along because they had a lot of status, they had a lot of money, they had entitlements, they had freedom, they had tons of things, and then ultimately at the end, all they had was each other, and that was worth it, right?
Exactly.
That's kind of the story that's told in The Sound of Music.
It is.
And I don't love that any of these are happening. I get them though. I get I get that the sacrifice is so high personally. It kind of it feels unfair that I should, not saying this applies to me. Clearly I'm doing this podcast, I'm railing about this stuff every week, right? But I can see how it feel unfair to a person. Why should I have to sacrifice so much when other people aren't having to sacrifice anything? It just feels unfair. I get it.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think that's where people have to do a continual kind of risk reward analysis in their own lives to say, at some point, the Von Trapp family, they went out, they got active.
Yeah.
Right?
They didn't have a choice. Yeah.
They didn't have a choice. And so the question for us is always, so what can we do now within our value set, within maybe not our comfort zone, but at least not so far out of our comfort zone that we're going to give up tomorrow. That's an individual kind of choice. So, I think that's particularly, you mentioned family. I think that's particularly true when it comes to close family. I've had family in the past that said or had viewpoints on things that I thought that's completely nuts. But I'm not going to, I'm not going to confront them on it because I want to maintain the relationship.
I want to have Christmas dinner with them still.
What's that?
I want to have Christmas dinner with them still.
Yeah, exactly.
Celebrate my grandchild's birthday party with my adult child whom I completely disagree with, but it's just not worth the fight.
Exactly. It's not worth the fight. Well, because at that point and that's why I say, and you said it at the beginning, that's why you got to know your own values. Because, my values for instance, my adult children, if they disagree with me, heaven forbid, but if my adult children disagree with me, then I'm not going to lose a relationship because that's a higher value to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Which this one in particular explains, I think, the best why we have these 80 to 100 year cycles. Like we take it because what it costs us would be out of balance with what we're fighting and what collectively would be gained for the personal sacrifice. It's just out of balance until all of a sudden it's not. And it happens rather quickly, I would imagine. We're not there yet, but I would imagine it's going to happen rather quickly for folks where they go, okay, these things I valued are not it's not in alignment anymore. I have to make
Right.
different decisions because there's different stakes now.
Yeah.
And so, again, this is one where I get the story of the Von Trapps. I mean, the Sound of Music, while again, the backdrop is a horrific setting, the story's a good one. Like you feel good at the end that they escaped and all they had was each other. They had no money and whatever.
Yep.
And so it kind of makes sense, that one, right? I agree with you. The next one I have is, and I don't mean this in tinfoil hat land, like for Kenny G, that means a crazy person. I don't mean people who are like certifiably crazy, but there is a cohort, I would imagine, who believes it's all just exaggerated. It can't be as bad as it's being made out to be on the news. My whole life I've heard it's going to be the end of the world, and this is just the next thing.
Yeah.
Why should I get all worked up? Because all I've ever heard is I should be worked up. And here I am at age 37 or 53 or 68 or whatever, and everything's always turned out to be fine. This is all it's just this year's BS.
Yeah. And that is, again, sort of back to the idea of things have always been this way. They're always going to be this way. We're going to have bumps in the road, but it's going to continue on. It's going to be just fine. And you're just an alarmist for talking about all this stuff. I think there's two things. There is that normalcy bias thing we talked about earlier. I think there's also a discomfort with change. I mean, we do a change in our own lives. So if something requires change for me personally, that can be a big, hurdle for me to overcome.
Yeah.
So, folks will resist that to the point of sometimes absurdity. Even they see things happening all around them, they still might resist that to the point of absurdity because they're just not comfortable with with what that really means, that things are changing. Now, it also explains why I think things accelerate very quickly in a time like we're in right now, what we call the fourth turning, because people there's thresholds. There's a threshold under which you can no longer be a sentient human being and deny what's happening around you. There's a point where that happens. And oftentimes it's not obvious until the very moment that happens. And then it's so
obvious until it is, right?
It's not obvious until it's Godzilla screaming down, from on high about ready to eat you. And then you have to take action. But then, the good thing about, at least in Western culture, and I think that's probably true of all cultures, I think it's just a human thing, that that's where the preservation and the survival instinct kicks in. And we talk about in the generational cycles, the hero generation. The hero generation is not a hero generation until the moment they're required to be a hero generation. And that's where this, I think, gets overcome. I think that's where that gets overcome.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think that this is, you and I talk about a lot of things that you and I disagree with sound like fantastic ideas until you introduce human behavior. And I think one of the core human behaviors that we just have to keep reminding ourselves of is exactly what you just described, which is people do not change until the pain of not changing is greater than the pain of changing.
Exactly.
Changing requires overcoming fear.
Yeah.
And that is significant, especially in situations like we're talking about. Like there's real fear that is legit. This is not like make believe fear. There's there's big fears that are legitimately in place for the things we're talking about. And those are enough to keep people from doing things until not doing something becomes more fearful. And then they have no choice. And that likely, I'm guessing, happens rather quickly.
Right. Well, and that's where the human, that's where fear gives way to confidence. I mean, it doesn't give way, but that's where confidence comes in, because when there is a light amount of weirdness happening in the world, well, we're not necessarily confident that it's going to be in ourselves to overcome it, or we're not confident that it's going to get so bad that we need to do something about it. But when it gets so bad that we are confident that we are right and this is crazy, then that fear of being wrong can sort of evaporate, really. I mean, the fear of being killed is more important at that point than the fear of being wrong, because it's so obvious. We can be confident in change. I don't think people change until they're confident in that
Yeah.
they're going to improve their state. They're going to improve their situation.
And the confidence, I would imagine, again, we're not even close to a moment like this yet, but I would imagine that confidence comes from acknowledging there's no alternative.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, like we've worked through all the things, and like it's either so urgent or we've eliminated all the other alternatives.
Exactly right.
Or some combination thereof, I would imagine.
Exactly.
All right. So the next one I have, and again, this is one I can kind of wrap my head around more than some of the other ones, which is there's nothing I can do, so why get worked up about it? The problem is literally too big to take on.
Right.
You and I have done a dozen different topics, and we've not even really scratched the surface of all the things people are arguing about.
Right.
and this episode and the last one we did are more kind of explaining the cycle. But before that, we were talking about like straight up topics people are arguing about. And you and I have a list of, dozens more we're going to get to someday, maybe. It is an unimaginable scale. The size of the problem is an unimaginable scale. It is the collective consciousness of the entire planet, kind of.
Yep.
It just like a person I could just totally see like, what can I do about it? And if I can't do anything about it, I might as well just go fishing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I can empathize with that one too, because sometimes it seems like the array of insanity, or the insanity that's arrayed against us, shall we say, is so great that it's just not overcomable. I think and this is, again, I think one of the things that hopefully we're bequeathing to Kenny G in the future is the idea that no, maybe as an individual you can't, but by you sharing, you'll remember this, Brian. I think there was a shampoo commercial with Heather Locklear back way in the day, and they told two friends.
I remember anything Heather Locklear did.
Well,
sure.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, she was very memorable. She definitely very memorable. So, and they told two friends, and so on and so on and so on. So I think if we admit to ourselves that yes, we can't go and change the world on our own. That's too heavy a lift. But does that mean that we can't influence somebody else and they'll tell two friends, and so on and so on and so on? That's, we live in the beginnings really of the social media era. And it's nothing if not, explosive in terms of things getting out there that where people tell more people what they think. So I think
real quick, won't it be funny if the social media era lasts like 25 years and Kenny G's listening to this and going, you guys talk about this like it's the grand beginning, and we shut that shit down a long time ago.
Well, there might be some benefits to that too. He wouldn't necessarily have to put up with Twitter, or now known as X, right?
Yeah. Anyhow, sorry to derail you on that thought. I just thought it would be funny if they're like people got smart and realized that was not helping society. We closed that stuff down.
Yes, especially for kids, or maybe they'll pass laws that you can't use social media until you're 45 or something. That would probably go right.
Yeah, you'd have a sweet spot window of 45 to 62 where you couldn't keep up with it anymore anyway, and this you only got a small window in your life where you could really participate. So another version of this also, like the scope is so big, I think there's nothing I can do about it, so why get all worked up? Another piece of that would not just be the size, but also there's no shortage of people pointing out what's wrong. There's a great scarcity in people who have seemingly plausible solutions. And most of us, again, using the current Middle East as just a easy way to point out and articulate my point here, we can all say how screwed up all the things are. Having a confidence or reasonable thought that we would have any kind of solution that would make sense, that's a whole different thing. Like it's much easier to point out what's wrong than point out how to fix it, is my point.
Well, and see, this is where I think that one of the things that we should do is help people to think with clarity. And by that, I mean this. If you look at the Middle East crisis, or any major problem that is multifaceted, that has 1,000 different moving parts, how do you start? You start with one thing. You start with just one thing that's the most obvious thing, that's the biggest problem right now, for instance. So if you, and this is where people have difficulties thinking. I mean, I think there's because we have so much information that's out there, when you deal with a problem like the Middle East, people will say, well, yeah, sure, they parachuted into a music festival and shot up a bunch of people, and their official documents for formation, their charter calls for the extermination of these other people, but it's because of this and this and this and this.
Right.
First of all, what you have to do is take one thing at a time. Just take one thing. Say, I tell you what, I don't have a solution for absolutely everything, but I have a incremental step in the right direction. And that is both sides agree that the other side has a fundamental human right to live. Nobody is seeking the extermination of an entire race of people. Well, but they did, no, forget about they did this and that. Forget about all that. We're doing one thing at a time. Once we've got that, now we're going to take the next step. How do you eat an elephant, right?
And so this is a great example, Dave. So like I would agree with that. And if the people who paratrooped into their, paraglided or whatever into that music festival, if they said, and they were honest, and they said, no, we don't agree with that. Our commandment from our prophet is to exterminate these people of this other religion.
Right.
Well, what do you do with that? Like, most of us would not be equipped to like, and then what kind of a response to that? And meaning, and then what, as far as what is a solution? We would have the ability and wherewithal to say, well, that's not a great way to live, and we would not agree with that. But what do we do as far as a solution now? It's either you accept that, you try to quarantine it, or you fight back. That seems like the only really
again, that's
right.
And that's exactly it. That's why you take one thing at a time, and you say that this is the one condition that must exist. Both sides must agree to this. And if one side doesn't agree to this, then the side that doesn't agree to this is wrong. And that side must no longer have the ability to execute their plans. And you say, but what about this? Forget about the nuance, forget about the context, forget about, Ishmael versus Isaac, for all of this stuff. You have to take the only way, and this is for insurmountable problems, you have to take it, the elephant in the room, right? One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. All right, so the last one I have, I have two more. The last one is pretty simple. The last one I have, though, and I'm sure people are out there like this. I don't know that I know any of them specifically, and you tell me if I'm wrong, Dave. Maybe these people don't exist. I'm just making stuff up. But people who don't want to appear to not be able to think in modern ways, meaning it's kind of corny and cliche right now to just have traditional values, partly because all the really exciting things we've experienced in our lives, mine and yours, in 50 years or 60 years or whatever, all the things we've experienced that are exciting have come from new technology, new ways of doing things. And I think what happens is people take that knowledge that these new gadgets and new technology, new ways of doing things have brought us excitement, and they apply it to values. And I think that's where the bridge is incorrectly built. That the technology is cool. Like, it's cool that we have electric cars, and it's cool that we have jet airplanes, and it's cool that we have the internet. That does not mean we should throw out the old values, because the values are what form relationships, and relationships are things you remember on your deathbed. Is kind of how I look at it.
Right.
But it feels cliche and corny and not with it and not educated and not modern and not able to think in modern terms. Like, you're a rube, you're a dope, it's just not cool to be old school in some of these ways. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, it's peer pressure. Right. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever is in flashing lights and is on the television. Oh, Kenny G's got holographs. Sorry, Kenny. We had a flat screen TV. It's called TV.
What's that?
It's television.
Wait till he hears about radio.
He'd never understand AM. Look it up. Smithsonian, Kenny, if it still exists. So, what I think that is people don't want to miss out, fear of missing out, FOMO. They don't want to miss out on what's happening. They don't want to be thought of as not cool. It's back to high school. I mean, for a lot of our society, we resort back to our high school experience. Well, there's the cool kids. They look cool. I want to be part of them. And so, we do everything. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day. I said, do you know what OG means? And they said, OG. Yeah, everybody says OG like you're the original. I said, where that came from? Original gangster.
Yeah.
And, are gangsters really somebody we want to emulate? Well, I'm just kind of dissecting it, right? I'm just, but they get the baggy pants. It's cool. Well, you're not cool because you wear the Levi's 501s. That's not cool.
Right.
People don't like to feel like they're not one of the cool kids. And therefore, right now, for instance, a lot of traditional values are not the cool kid values. The cool kid value is you can say you're a furry and everybody's going to acknowledge you as a furry, or whatever it happens to be. And whatever it is in the future, I don't know what it'll be in the future. But that's really where it's at.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And we're getting short on time here. The last category, which is probably the most unfair I have of all of them, and may not even be applicable after we go through this whole list here. There's tons of reasons to not speak up. The last one I have, which again is probably the most unfair, is just cowards.
Yeah,
people who are just and maybe every one of the categories we went over has an element of that, and maybe again that's probably not being fair, but I just kind of go back to, I mentioned this a few episodes ago, like, when I was a kid growing up, we would watch Westerns, TV, movies and TV shows, and the hero was the guy who stood up to the mob, risking his own life to give the prisoner a shot at a fair trial when everybody knew he was guilty. That was the hero, was the guy willing to stand up to the mob.
Yep.
And I just don't feel like we have, I feel like we have some people who just don't see that as a characteristic or a trait that's worth having anymore.
Yeah.
And it's just better to just go along and, like, who cares? It doesn't affect me. Let the next person worry about it. Let the next generation worry about it. And to like hyper explain this, I guess it feels like now kids, a 14 or 17-year-old kid would watch that same Western and think, I hope I have the guts to overlook the humanity of the person who would get lynched and go along with the mob, even though my gut might tell me this isn't the right thing to do. It feels like it's that 180 completely.
Yeah.
And I'm probably like, okay, thanks, geezer, for whatever. I'm sure there's an element of that going on, but just people who are just cowards, who just are not willing to stand on their morals.
Well, and I think I wonder, I don't know the answer to this. I wonder if there is more of that now and it's just more obvious, or if that's always been X percentage of the crowd and they just kind of blended in the past. And I honestly don't know the answer to that. I mean, it is, I think, part of the kind of the cool kid thing today to be part of the wolf pack and just to go on along with them. I mean, there's always been that sort of herd pack mentality thing that says, yes, I'm willing to do something that I believe is morally wrong because everybody else is doing it. So therefore the wisdom of the crowd.
Get paid. Or I get status, or I get a political appointment, or there's history's full of that stuff for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the soldiers, I'm under orders, and so there's some, there's some. It's hard to draw where those lines are sometimes, but my gut feeling is there's probably not much different now, except that we can perceive it more now than it's been before.
I think that the only difference that I could, off the top of my head, and having never thought through this idea before, off the top of my head, the only thing I can think of is there were consequences in society in 1958 for being a coward that are not in place today.
True. Yep. That's true.
I think that's the only thing that I would do. Anyhow, not to belabor that, we're getting short on time. I guess, like you alluded to this earlier, advice, if any, I were to give to Kenny G would be a couple of things. One, acknowledge that Auschwitz only happened because everybody stayed silent. Right.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean you're going to be successful in every endeavor. I think that the two things I would say is get clear on your values and just an incremental step. You don't have to go from a 1 to a 10 on everything.
Exactly.
If a number of people go from a 1 to a 2 or 1 to a 3, even, we can make a lot of progress. We don't all have to conquer the entire mountain.
Absolutely.
We all just have to do a little bit and show other people that doing a little bit isn't going to kill you.
Exactly. That's the key. That's the key. If whatever else we've said, I think that's the key. Do something. Do a little bit. Do it to the extent that you can. Don't hold yourself up to a standard of somebody that has, capabilities or experiences that you don't have. So
Right.
don't be sad if you can't do 10. If you can only do one, not 0. If you can do 2,
Yeah.
do 2, not 0. Just do
100%.
something.
Yeah. And I will just say a side benefit, you and I have been doing this podcast for a few months now. I feel, even if nobody ever listens to it,
Yeah.
I feel better just getting this stuff off my chest.
Absolutely.
And I would tell Kenny G, even if you think that it's going on deaf ears, personally, you would likely just feel better just acknowledging that you're not crazy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And you've tried. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that we're responsible to try to contribute. Now, whether the world appreciates that contribution, I've told my kids, look, guys, you're not responsible for a lot of the outcomes, but you can give a little bit of an input, and you can feel good about the fact that you give some input. I think that's plenty. I think that's fine.
Yeah. 100%. All right, Dave, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. As always, great thoughts. Great job. And for those of you listening, if you think we missed something, that's what we're asking you. Let us know where we got it wrong. Let us know what we missed. Let us know if you think there's a whole category of people that we didn't even consider. And go to Unsilent Podcast and find out where you can put your thoughts in there. Go to our social media channels, of course. Go to rumble.com, and on this episode, on the video, you can put comments there. That's probably the best place to put comments. Yep. And let us know if we missed somebody. Let us know if we missed a couple of categories of folks that we want to explain to people in decades from now what this moment feels like. So it's not just they woke up one day and there was an internment camp there next to them and nobody said anything. Like what is leading to that? That's what we're trying to explain. So until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.